thank you for watching the film Fish and Men. I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to introduce to you the co-directors of this film, Darby Duffin and also Adam Jones. And we're going to have a brief conversation with them about this film. So let me ask you, first of all, Darby, you're living in Texas right now, and Adam, you are living in Oregon, is that correct?
Oregon.
Oregon, yes. Maybe I should pronounce it correctly. Were you born on the East Coast? Were you raised on the East Coast? Is there something that connected you to Massachusetts?
Yeah, we're both from the East Coast. I moved there in high school and returned for college, and when we started, we were both living in New Hampshire. So, and I'd lived in Massachusetts for a number of years. It's more or less where I grew up. So yeah, there was a lot of, there was a connection there. I actually lived in a little coastal town south of Boston, Situate, Mass, where we actually, shot one of the interviews with the fishermen. So yeah, there was a connection there for sure.
And Adam?
Yeah, I grew up in New Hampshire. So I lived there all through high school and everything, and then moved back there when I started a family in my mid-30s. So that was when Darby and I hooked up and basically found this subject matter that we could, as most doc filmmakers sometimes want to do, shoot a whole bunch of stuff where we didn't have to get on a plane. We could just sort of pick up our cameras and go, starting in Gloucester, and that was where we started.
But to jump ahead a bit, you did jump on a plane, or who jumped on the plane to go to Norway?
Oh, I did with one of our DPs, yeah. And we actually went to Iceland as well. So that portion of the film, it has some great cinematography, and it's great seeing this great character there, but it just ultimately didn't fit into the story when we were kind of honing that. Yeah.
So because you grew up in the area, this interested you. You both eat fish?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
It'd be interesting if you didn't.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of great seafood making this movie.
We have a little side benefit, one of the perks.
I imagine, based on the restaurants that are mentioned in there too. So also about the filmmaking is that there's two directors. There's both of you doing it. How did you do that? Or why did you do that? How did you do that? How easy did it go?
I'll start and say, so I'd initially developed this as a pitch, as a concept for a pitch contest, right? And it worked really well as a proof of concept. And, so I had thought, well, I've been wanting to do a doc for a long time. I'd worked in development, production, but I'd never made a film. So I knew it was just going to be way too much, too much of a burden, too much to do on my own. And, I knew Adam had been working as commercial director for a long time, and I just know that he had an interest in film. So, I pitched to him, and I thought, hey, how would you like to go at this, partner up and tackle this together? And I'd shot one scene. That was a scene on, that was the fish pier rally. That was sort of the first day, and then, there was so much to do, so much to explore. And I remember at the end of that conversation, we had lunch, and Adam said, we have to start at this right away. We have to get started tomorrow. And so it wasn't that long after that we started shooting, started planning. It ultimately took us probably a good 2.5 years of shooting, off and on. We both had our day jobs, but, there was certainly, it was a shared effort. It's a lot to pull off on your own. So we really relied on each other to sort of, balance that burden, between not just the film, but professionally, family life, and all of that. Right? So.
And what I find interesting, and maybe you've experienced this with documentaries, is that often with documentaries that don't have $1 million budgets, the director happens to be the editor also. And here you used Heidi Zimmerman, who also was involved in the screenplay and producing. But what I find what I like a lot about this is that you have a large story that you do not, that is paced incredibly well, because you are able to shift focus while keeping the larger germ of the idea in mind. And I will say, having seen it 3 times, that each time I forget it's an 85-minute film. I keep thinking it's under 60 minutes because it moves so well and there's so much there. So did either of you, what was that decision? Because that's not often made, that you stay away from the editing, or let's rephrase that, somebody else is in charge of the editing of this.
Well, we actually had, I think, closer to 7 editors over the 7 years.
Yeah.
That we finally found Heidi, and we finally started to. I think Darby and I learned. It's safe to say Darby and I learned an awful lot during this process on how to do things and how not to do things. And one thing we did in our inexperience, as well as because we were just paying for it ourselves, we never really had a post-production workflow set up from the outset. And what we wound up doing, which I wouldn't recommend to any doc filmmaker, is to go and pile up about 250 hours of film before you start cutting. And it became such a overwhelming puzzle to even organize before you can start cutting. I mean, we hadn't organized the project. We were not editors that could ever handle something of this volume. So we kind of ate through editors in phases, where it was like, here's one guy, he's going to put together, in 4 months, our first assembly, every single scene laid out. And then from there, we went through another editor and another editor, and we would like run out of money and then get some more money and then run out of money. And then those people would take other projects, until finally we settled on Heidi, who lives here in Portland, right near me, which was a big advantage, because it's nice to be able to go physically sit with your editor. I mean, one other thing to remember on this is that I think Darby's moved houses twice during the making of this film, and me once. So what started out with some geographic proximity is now like opposite parts of the country. And so anyway, it was really when Heidi when we found her, and she was somebody who was she's just an angel. She's so meticulous. She was really good with us, because she was often like, I don't want to say a referee, but there are moments, where you got to make decisions, and everybody's got their point of view, and sometimes they're not always congruous. So I think, a huge part of this is really how she helped us distill what is a very complicated amount of information that has geography, that has science, that has, regulation and government and culinary, and like all these different elements, and lay it out in such a way that it's literally digestible for a viewer, where we use that the character in the film, Barton Seaver, as kind of, what we called him, like our Gandalf. Like, he could lead us from one subject to another, so that we could kind of balance the way the film was being information given and not be overwhelming, so that we would try and really give the viewer enough time to absorb some of it, and then also to balance out some of the heavier stuff with some levity, and so it was really about balance, I think, is something that we learned a lot from this process to try and arrive at the cut where it is. It took a long time, I think almost 2 years of nothing but editing.
Well, at least, yeah, if not 3. Yeah, and we did a lot of private screenings, solicited feedback from people inside the industry, people that we knew, and people that were filmmakers, some that were not. Some that were just involved in the seafood side of the business, and with that perspective, that was an invaluable step in the process too, that we learned as well. That as we were fine-tuning it, that feedback was really critical in helping us get out of our own myopic, perspective on what had to be in there, what maybe wasn't as, meaningful or relevant or impactful as we thought it was. So yeah, that was just another piece that I don't think we would have gotten to where we were had we not done so many of these screenings. And Adam, hosted quite a few of them or in person. I was, I had the protection of being there sort of virtually and avoiding some of the questions. But that can be, that can always be an uncomfortable part of the process as well, So, but we got through it, and I think the film is a lot better for it.
So many festivals, many documentaries that are made, they're advocating vegetarianism. You see that all the time. You are fish lovers. I'm a fish lover. The hope is that people will see something that they will try to do. And I'm hoping a lot of viewers don't eat fish and that this entices them in some way to give it a try. But there's a lot of concerns that are raised in the film. And so asking you as you went into this and when you came out of it, what was the most heartening, positive thing you got from making this film that you had witnessed or learned? And what was the most disheartening?
That's a good question.
That is.
Heartening, I guess I would say that there are people that are actually making progress. We featured Dr. Dish, right? There's certainly other groups like that. I think Dr. Dish is probably the most successful one, for people who haven't seen the film. It is a sort of a startup organization, much like you would have from the farm to table movement, that's taken that concept and applied it to seafood. So, there's programs like CSS, which are community supported fisheries, and people will buy shares, and in exchange, they'll get whatever the fisherman can catch. That means they can't say, I want, on an order sheet, pick and choose. That model has been really successful, and people are buying into it, maybe not on a macro scale, but on regionally and actually throughout the country, but it just hasn't gotten enough momentum that it's really begun to make, change the industry in a way profoundly yet. But I do think, so the question was, what's the most heartening? And then I think there's so much promise there. And what Dr. Dish specifically has done is they've made this model, as we show, it's a restaurant supported fishery. So instead of, being supported by individuals like me and you getting fish delivered to our door, Eric Repair or Dan Barber or some of the biggest chefs, at these iconic restaurants on both coasts, they're supporting this model, right? And so they're saying, whatever you get, we will take it and we will sell it. And if you're buying Eric, you're going to eat whatever Eric Repair is cooking for you, right? So, I think it's a model that has a lot of potential, and I do think it's beginning to have an impact. I think, as Dan Barber said, it's just going to take time. So I'll let Adam handle the disheartening.
Yeah, the flip the model thing was a big one for me too. Barton says it beautifully in the film where he says, what we've done is create an economy, an irrational economy where, we demand more than the ocean can sustainably supply. And that goes into all, for me, that was the eye opener, the big eye opener for us. I think from the outset, in terms of disheartening also, just to keep going on, that was the 91% imported seafood that Americans eat. I love you play that quiz question to people. Take a guess. What do you think it is? Oh, I think it's really high, 65%. It's like, no, it's 91. So those were eye openers, I think, for us. But in terms of the other disheartening thing would be, for me, was learning that, we basically only, as Americans, we basically stick to 5 species of fish that we eat. And so it really is an eye opener when you start thinking outside that, and you start realizing how many different species there are out there that are delicious and just like the ones that you're used to. And then start thinking about when they're in season, and start thinking about how you might have to cook it slightly differently, or maybe it cooks just the same, but you have to sort of alter your behavior when you go to the counter at the grocery store, or when you see something like rockfish on a menu in an Oregon restaurant, So, there were so many eye-opening things on this It was like, you know, they say that like if you make a documentary film, well, you just got a PhD in filmmaking because you actually finished it. But I think we also kind of got a PhD in like the seafood industry on this, and for better or for worse, it's going to curse us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I would add one other thing. I think one of the disheartening things too is to see that, you know, this is another one of those big sort of shocking points is of that 91%, only 1% is getting looked at. And, you know, 50% that is getting discarded, doesn't pass our standards. So, you know, I mean, I think the big reality there is that it's a big unknown. We don't know exactly what we're eating. I mean, it's that simple. It hasn't been, you know, so if you're eating imported fish, you know, you just don't know. The whole supply chain, the global seafood supply chain is so murky. It's such a murky world. There's such a lack of transparency and traceability. We just don't know. And so I think the lack of progress and policy fronts and seeing some meaningful changes when it comes to informing consumers or requiring, you know, where this fish is from is, you know, there's a lot to be done, I think. So that's why we sort of asked that question. Do you know where your seafood is from?
And one more point about that, and I think you just alluded to it in your original question, is Darby and I were hypersensitive to the idea, especially when editing, that we did not want to scare people away from eating seafood. Because some of this subject matter definitely has the potential to be like, oh man, it's just too confusing. I'm going to go eat a hamburger. So we really tried to, you know, we had to show sort of like where the problems were, where the misconceptions were, where the controversy was, but at the same time, keeping eating seafood as a good thing. It was a tough balance.
For sure. I mean, I think we are saying, you know, there are certain questions about certain seafood, right, that we bring up in the film. We sort of mock tilapia, you know, so we're kind of using that, right, as the example of this just ubiquitous whitefish that everybody's eating without thinking about it, without thinking about where it comes from, or without ever challenging the palate to say, hey, I'd like to try something a little different, you know, we're just, you know. So yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot more that can be done in terms of consumer behavior and consumer taste. And I think, you know, ultimately, as you see in the film, you know, that's really where we're trying to put our effort and put the focus on is back to the consumer. Because like Adam said, you know, it's like 85% of what we eat are those 5 things. And they're not great things. You're talking canned tuna, tilapia, farm salmon, you know,
and gaseous catfish.
Catfish, right. You know, so, so there's so many, it's amazing to me that we have so much coastline. We have so many, you know, various, you know, variety of seafood across this country and community fishing ports that we're not eating or don't seem to be as interested in what we have to offer as we should be.
And on the microcosm level, which to me is a concern when I see these fishermen in Gloucester who are struggling, who may not make it. And apparently there's now 10 to 12 family-owned boats left there in a major fishing area. What can people do because a microcosm, I'm concerned. I don't know if that's going to save everything. And I know that there's a favorite Japanese restaurant I go to here. They had a red snapper hors d'oeuvre. Always got it. And then one time it just didn't taste right. And the next time I come in, it's not red snapper anymore. It's tilapia. So I did note that line that is said in this film is the funniest line in any of the documentaries we got. It's hysterical because if you know tilapia, you get it. And if you don't, it's still funny. So,
which line are you talking about? Russell's or?
I wouldn't eat tilapia from another
somebody else's mouth.
Somebody else's mouth. Yes.
Yeah.
Is there something more that can be done? Because a microcosm will help And let me jump to another question on that about the bycatching, which shown in Gloucester is that it's tossed overboard. But a lot of what seems to be happening at the end, on the positive note, of getting these other fish to these restaurants that'll just take the catch of the day, is that bycatching. Is there a difference in area as to what you can keep or can't keep?
You mean in terms of what you're allotted? I mean, we have, I think we make that point early on that, you know, it's the United States is the most regulated fishery in the world, right? So if you're catching something, you need a permit for it, right? You need, and in the way that the management system works now, you know, you're allocated quota, and that goes into like historical, you know, what your fishing past has been, your fishing history. The short answer to that question is yes. If you're catching it and selling it, you need to have quota to sell, you know, to fish it and to sell it. You know, so that's the crux of how fish are managed, you know, in the science that we get into in terms of how many fish are actually out there. Because everything is dependent upon that. How much quota you get depends on how much fish they say are actually out there. And that's, you know, the heart of the disagreement, right? So, so I don't know, back to your original question.
Well, say the dock, when they're going to the docks and they're buying the fish right from the trawler. Is that fishermen, these seem to be like not standard fish, etc. Do they have permits for those specific fish?
Are you talking about like alternative species like monkfish or?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. It's my understanding that, you know, they have an allocation for everything that they're catching and everything that they're selling. Yeah. And it's just, you know, we're focused in on cod. We're focused in on these cod and haddock, these the most marketable species, you know. And we're trying to put the focus back on some of these other species. And we do that with the monkfish episode, Julie Childs, which, you know, and the whole idea of trash fish. But, you know, bycatch is a reality where, you know, if they don't have a permit for it and they've got to toss it over, or they're over their quota and they have to toss it over, right? So there's, you know, there is a lot that could be improved. I mean, we're certainly wasting a lot of fish, right, through bycatch, and we made that point. I'm not going to suggest what the answer is, but I think, you know, smarter minds than us could probably say that, you know, there's got to be a better solution to this bycatch, you know, that is a complete waste, you know, of opportunity. You know, there's just, as an aside, there's an organization called SeaShare. I interviewed the guy who's the executive director there. What they do is they've actually been given quota. Well, they've actually been allowed to take the bycatch and sell it using food banks. So it's an amazing program that, you know, whereby, hey, we're, you know, all this bycatch, we're going to keep it instead of dumping it over the side. The government is, you know, partitioning that off and having that, you know, bycatch given to this organization, which then goes and gives it away to feed hungry people. I mean, that seems like a great solution to me. But, you know, it's a big issue for sure.
And I also see local schools, et cetera. What you show at the end of the movie is very heartening in that sense to get that. One final question, because we're running out of the time, is on the microcosm level and the concerns that are approached in this film, and talking about antibiotics in Asia that they use on these fish. What's the concerns in regards to just the toxins that end up in our ocean, especially here, say on the East Coast? What is a concern for people who are interested in fish, number one? And then do you think that, are there any other ideas as to how we can make this microcosm a macrocosm to get fish back and support fisheries?
Well, I mean, you touched on something that was one of those kind of continental divides that we talked about a lot in making it, where, you know, using something like Dock to Dish, yes, it is kind of a micro scale solution, where it's almost like a flagship, but to juxtapose the setup of Dock to Dish at the end of the film with that guy Spencer who went and delivered the Acadian redfish to the high school, and to suggest that there are institutions out there like public schools, prisons, hospitals that might be new markets for fishermen to sell their fish. I mean, to be honest with you, though, getting back to your concern about the Gloucester fishermen, I don't know if there's going to be a happy ending there. The macro question: what tips the scale to really move the needle? I mean, ideally, you'd need some of the mega processors around the world to get on board. The retailers and the processors that are selling, are dealing with millions and millions of pounds of fish and export.
Does that mean it froze or?
No.
Yeah. Well, I'll pick up until Adam's unfrozen. I think he's right that until we can get some of the bigger players in the industry to buy into it, that the positive impacts might be incremental. But as I say, I think first it's twofold, right? It's consumer awareness. The consumer is beginning to recognize that there's an alternative. And, you may not, this is one of the points that we discussed in the film about, where you live may determine what is, of course, available to you. So you might be limited to that. Like, okay, so, if you're in New England, you've got certain species, or on the West Coast or here. So, but I mean, making a smart choice of, choosing local first, I think is sort of the most basic step consumers can make, in terms of what fish should I choose. But yeah, I think, certainly the growing awareness and getting in some of the bigger players to buy in is hopefully something that comes out of this.
Thank you, gentlemen. For the viewers, you watched Fish and Men. This is the two directors of this, Darby Duffin and Adam Jones. I thank you very much for taking the time, and I thoroughly appreciate that you spent years making this film. It was well worth it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.